Thank you for listening to the Troy Podcast, where we promote, educate, inspire, and entertain creators of all things related to fantasy and science fiction. Hi, this is Carson with Troy, and I have with me Daniel Crux, whose sci-fi series, The Black Sun, is out now. Daniel, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about The Black Sun.
Hi, my name is Daniel Crux. I am the author of the sci-fi epic Black Sun, which 6 books so far, working on the seventh. It'll just keep going on from there. Black Sun is obviously a space opera about with the central theme being space piracy. Sometime in the present day, we Earth is invaded by aliens, and naturally, we're beaten back until we use nuclear weapons to force back the invaders, but we irradiate the planet in the process. This leads to a post APOC period, which is considered the second age of man. Goes on for anywhere between a couple hundred to a couple thousand years until one warrior, for lack of a better description, rises up and essentially rediscovers the civilization that we've lost. And he forms an empire, takes over the rest of the planet, and over the course of time, revitalizes everything, thus forming the third age of man. And one of the byproducts of this is we expand into space. We discover faster than light travel, and we decide to expand ourselves into beyond the solar system and start colonizing everything. Well, another byproduct of this is the logistics. Obviously, you have different colonies with different needs, so there's a lot of interstellar travel with supplies and goods. So that invites piracy to make its grand return, kind of like in the Age of Exploration / Golden Age of Piracy. Some of the most prominent pirates groups out there go on to form their own nations called clans. Kind of like what they tried to do in, I think it was Nassau back in the day. I'm a very big history buff, so I like I like to put that in my work.
Oh, nice.
And I know a few pirates actually tried to make free republics for themselves. They didn't work out, obviously, but in my book, the pirate clans, as they're called, form into full-fledged nations. And one of these clans is called the Gold Dragon Clan. It's started by a woman called Morgana Flint, and it lasts for 20 years until, in the prologue, she is intercepted somewhere, and long story short, she dies, but not before sending her two children out in, into the world to survive. Time skip later, the children grow up and become full fledged pirates themselves. They're not any closer to carrying on their family legacy, they're barely surviving.
Okay.
And, and that's when certain event happens, not too many spoilers, that leads them to accepting a job. They have to uh, hijack a certain ship from one of the most heavily fortified bases in the galaxy. This is the ship that becomes Black Sun. And that once they hijack it, obviously, form a crew, head back into space, and the rest of the story, saga, if you will, is about their various adventures as they try to rebuild their clan as well as pursue one of the greatest, if not the greatest mystery the galaxy has to offer.
Nice. So you have done quite a bit of backstory and some in-depth pre-writing on this.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like. What was the genesis for this book series?
Around the turn of the century, I don't know if you're into anime or anything like that, or I mean, I grew up on Cartoon Network Toonami. You know that TV block back in the late '90s. early aughts.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when streaming started, I mean, literally started, they had something called Toonami React, where they put on old anime classics like Space Battleship Yamato, Star Blazers to Us, some some Dragon Ball Z,
Mm-hmm.
and a bunch of others.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they put on was called the Harlock Saga,
Okay.
and it's a classic around the classic anime character, space pirate Captain Harlock, who made by the same mind behind Yamato, which I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked into that because it was an intriguing idea, but I realized Harlock, the character, is not really a space pirate. He has the aesthetics for it. He has the eye patch. His ship has skulls and crossbones all over it. But he's more of a Robin Hood figure in space. He's fighting a war on Earth's behalf when Earth doesn't want to fight it against this alien threat.
Right.
And I thought, now that I think about it, there hasn't been a science fiction series, space opera or otherwise, that tackles piracy in space, actual piracy, where you intercept supply convoys or raid planets, pillage and plunder,
Mm-hmm.
like in Pirates of the Caribbean.
Right.
And that idea just snowballed over time. It took on various forms through the aughts. I mean, it started off as small writing, but eventually I got out of college. And around that time, well, before that, I got a degree in video game design. My plan was to go into story writing for, say, Konami or whatever. But around that time, there was a big demand for graphic designers and programmers, but writers were all too valuable. If you had them, you did everything to keep them. So there were no prospects for that. My mother, in her wisdom, I mean, great wisdom, I should say, told me that use this as an opportunity. You wanted to be a story writer, so pursue that full time. Develop your series. I mean, don't just write it, develop it. Set up the world, the universe it's in, the characters, the everything down to all the reading material that my main character, Captain Jonathan Flint, likes to do in his free time. It took me about 4 years after that to write the first three books. All throughout, I would write up to a point that I realized, oh crap, I don't have anything for this part. So I'd stop writing and just write, come up with whatever I needed at the time and just continued on.
Mm-hmm.
And before I knew it, I had a whole universe unto my own.
How long did it take you? You said you had 4 years to write your 3 books. Um,
Uh-huh.
what were your writing habits at that point?
I did it a chapter at a time. Originally, the first three books were one book. I mean, if you take, say, book two or book three, you'll notice that they don't start at chapter one. They start, I mean, I think book two starts at chapter 18, and I forgot where book three starts, but essentially they're the same story, just divided into three books.
Okay, was that a difficult decision to do?
No, not really. It was necessary for publication. And again, referring back to my mother, she wanted to brag that I had a whole trilogy unto my own. And so that kind of worked out for me in the end.
Right. The wisdoms of mothers. Where would we be without a little nudge from our moms? Shout out to all moms out there.
I'm going to say this now, Morgana Flint, the character is based on my mother.
Oh, nice.
And yes, I do kill her off in the prologue. Everyone points that out. But she leaves she is a legend in the series. She leaves a lasting impact, especially on her children. So I like to think I paid a fair amount of tribute to my own mother there.
So, when did the first book come out?
Was set up for publishing with a New York company around 2015. I remember because it was just before the first Star Wars sequel movie came out. And I got my first rejection then because it, in hindsight, just wasn't ready at the time. I had to do a bunch of other things before, refine it more, if you will, before it could be picked up.
Mm-hmm.
So that took a few more years until all the while I'm writing the fourth book and then the fifth book. And then I into my current publisher, Nick, I think around 2018. And again, I had to break it up into three books, and when it was one book at the start. And that's what attracted Nick's interest because one of the things in publishing that I became aware of early on is that everyone writes at least one book. They write one book on any subject. Usually it's an autobiography, but every now and then you have a story writer that thinks they can write this epic in one go, and they think they'll be set for life thereafter. Every now and then you get an author that will write two books, and then even further on you get an author that will write three books, and so on and so forth. So Nick sees I wrote three books and picks me up. So it wasn't set there, obviously. I'm still trying to get the books out there, but as far as name recognition and the like goes. But that essentially the first progression ended at that point, and another began.
You got picked up by Nick, who is the owner of Inkwell Publishing, and it
Yes,
is a hybrid system where they work with the authors. Can you
yes.
go ahead and explain what Inkwell Publishing does and how they have helped you?
Nick likes to brag he was the first one to do the hybrid publishing thing. I honestly I didn't care at that point what it was, so long as my work was published and it got out there. And Nick, ha- and that's what Nick did. He got me into the bookstores, or at least the websites to the bookstores. And I mean, if you type in Black Sun Daniel Crux, you'll notice how quickly it'll come up and how many bookstores around the world are selling my books. I mean, it's as a hybrid publisher, I had to pay into it somewhat, but not into Nick's pocket. I mean, that would make him a vanity publisher, no, which is a label neither of us want to be associated with. He provided me the contacts for advertising and different catalogs that bookstores look through to to decide what they want to market. And I had to pay some of it. He had to pay some of it, but that's essentially what hybrid publishing is. You put your money on the line, so a bit more than you'd be comfortable with, but it's all toward a good cause. I mean, getting your books out there and not having any negativity associated to it.
As indie publishers are starting their journey, it's something they
Mm-hmm.
can look to in order to have somebody that has contacts that can help you. I know a lot of indie authors, as they are struggling to get their first book out, they have to do everything. They have to find an editor to make sure everything's okay, and a cover
Yeah.
artist, and they have to learn marketing and what to do. It sounds like with Inkwell Publishing, they help you with those kind of tougher issues.
Yes, they do. And I like to think there are others like Nick out there because, again, he has really helped me come this far.
So book six is out now. What are some of your writing habits now?
My writing habits haven't really changed. I write a chapter at a time, and sometimes I have it planned out from the beginning all the way to the end. I had that around book five, I believe. Other times, books like book six, I start out with concept, and then as I keep writing, it all gradually just sells in.
So with that concept, are you more of okay? I have three. big events throughout the book that I want to get to, or do you just have like an ending or a beginning and you just kind of go?
It it depends on the book. I mean, with book 7 right now, uh, I started out with the concept, and I'm still planning the ending out. I have a general idea. It's just putting it and organizing it on paper. With the first 3 books, I had a beginning and I had an ending. And I basically had to fill out how I'm going to connect the two.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it again, it all there is no set standard, at least on my side of things. It just depends on what the idea the idea I have at the time, and then through one way or another, I just felt the rest of it.
Nice. I'm glad that it comes together. So why, you said you're a history buff. You could have chosen like a fictional history, a la Eric Flint with Bain Publishing. Why did you choose science fiction?
Well, to start off with, I have what used to be called Asperger's syndrome. I mean, I don't mind pointing that out right there. It's probably going to be obvious in my work. And one of the things I've been best at and had the most trouble with is thinking outside the box. I get bored with the real world. I get bored with rules and things that fit nicely in the box, the creative box, if you will. And science fiction allows me to expand beyond that because I can come up with things that could never happen in the current world, but in my little universe where we're not confined to one planet and sometimes even one set of physical laws, I can basically do whatever I want. And while making sense, of course, but still.
That's one of the things that I love about the fantasy and science fiction genres is you can create a whole world, a whole universe, and you said as long as it makes sense, as long as there are rules that have it make sense, you can do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's what's so great. Sometimes we need a palate cleanser from the things of the world. We need something to kind of take us away from the daily stresses. And some people read history books or whatever books. But for me, it was always fantasy and science fiction. And I love that. Do you remember kind of the first stories that brought you into that genre?
Michael A. Stackpole's X-Wing series for the original Star Wars EU. The, I mean, I read Jules Verne, War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, all the classics, but it wasn't until I got into the X-Wing series. I mean, his depiction of Star Wars that was centered on military conflict and politics and all that, as opposed to the Jedi running around with their lightsabers. I mean, that's what got me into sci-fi full time.
So you said Michael Stackpole helped you, kind of inspired you. Is there any other authors that inspired you? You mentioned Jules Verne and some of the classics.
Well, again, I go back to my mother and her seemingly infinite wisdom. One of the things she did was she bought my brother and I abridged classics as children. Moby Dick, Robin Hood, and obviously 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And they were same stories, but they were broken down so that children could read
Mm-hmm.
them. And I love 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I read the book. I saw the Disney movie back when Disney was really, really good. That made an impact on me because, again, Jules Verne did not take the the box and believe that that was all there was he could do as far as writing went. Yeah, there was a historical submarine that Napoleon's Navy, I believe, was developing. They never fielded it, but they were. It was a predecessor to the Nautilus, and that's Obviously, that's what inspired Jules Verne to write 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. As you said, the creative process, just that you take something, say a historical event or something that happened in the present, and you decide that I can adapt this to words, but I don't have to keep in the confines of the real world. And I always thought that that part of the development to 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I always thought that was inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
You said you saw the ship at Fan Fusion. It's based on a German U-boat
Okay.
from World War II. And I got the idea. Originally, it was going to be like the Yamato, where a battleship or a battle cruiser, World War II style. But then I saw Das Boot, and I realized, now that I think about it, submarines have always been equated to pirate ships. There was a British admiral back in the day that, when submarines first came out, he hated the concept so much that he compared the crews to the submarines as brigands and pirates.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, they took that as a badge of honor. So ever since then, the victory flag for a successful submarine mission executed has been the Jolly Roger. When HMS Conqueror sunk the General Belgrado in the Falklands, for example, she returned to her port, with the Jolly Roger waving from her sail. That's the part that sticks out from the rest. Again, I do a lot of research.
No, it sounds like it. And with your story, like I said before, you've done a lot of background to create your story. Did you start with that background? And you're like, okay, I want to build this world,
Mm-hmm.
have these different ages, and then I'm going to start the story here? Or did you have an idea for the story and then kind of retroactively, how am I going to create a world that fits into this?
I'd say the retroactive part. Originally, the story began as, again, after Captain Harlock. I believe they came up with two brothers that become space pirates, and they do the standard pirating gig. Go after supply convoys, moving between the different settlements and colonies.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, it just snowballed, where I come up with another idea I'd add into the general notes, and by the time the 2010s rolled around, I had a full universe to work with.
Yeah, it sounds like it's pretty in depth, and you could explore the universe infinitely if
Mm-hmm.
you want to.
Yes, I can, and so I hope the readers can too once they pick it up.
Yeah, you said that you sold out of your first book of the series at Phoenix Fan Fusion. How
Mm-hmm.
can you said you could get online? Is there a specific store? Like, do you have your own website that sells the book series if people want to grab a hold of it?
Yes, I do. I www.danielcrux, one word, .com,
And that's
you can,
Crux with an X.
with an X. And obviously it's on Amazon, but I think they're sold out book one as well, thanks to Fan Fusion.
Yeah, I got on to look, and they didn't have any.
Nope. Most of the people that came up, another trick to the business, by the way, is not sometimes the customer will always be hesitant to buy the product because they don't want to commit fully. So, to any authors, independent or otherwise, are listening out there, you want to put uh, the summary of your first book on a card. And if someone's interested but doesn't want to buy the book right there, you pass them the card, has the summary, as well as a brief biography of yourself, and as well as links to where they can pick up your book. And sometimes they'll they'll go home and decide, I'm going to try this, and you'll you'll have sold a book right there.
That's great advice. Anybody that's going to conventions or just a pass along card, if you're just in the elevator or something. That's great advice. Going back to Inkwell Publishing, how involved are they in like the marketing side and stuff, or is that just all you?
I know next to nothing about marketing. I mean, Inkwell is, again, Inkwell provide the contacts regarding the catalogs and the bookstores and all that. But as far as marketing goes, I go back to my mother, who, well, my mother is a, she was a chemical engineer back in the day,
Oh,
literal
really?
rocket scientist.
Wow.
So she is a dictionary definition workaholic. She's retired now, and if you don't mind a little bit of shameless promoting, she's putting to get. She has a charity called Busted Broads, and she works with her partner worked hu- human resources for the biggest lawyer firm in Phoenix for a time. So she and in human resources, you don't just it's not just a standard office job with a meaningless title. You actually have to deal with that aspect of the company, the human side of it.
Right.
And that requires her to travel to different conventions to promote the company and see what kind of employees she could recruit. So she knows promotion. She knows how these conventions work.
Mm-hmm.
And she helped me instrumentally with Fan Fusion. She was the one that came up with the card idea for the summary and the biography.
Uh huh.
And obviously, business cards, those are essential too.
Right.
She and my mother advised me on what kind of artwork would attract crowds. I mean, obviously, there's characters
Mm-hmm.
and the ship itself. I mean, those are the two things I think every space opera needs to show up front. Think of it like this: Star Trek would not be as recognized today if it were just James T. Kirk and the crew on the bridge. You have to have the Enterprise there as well.
Right.
And you have to show what it all looks like, because some people, you can write down the most in-depth description you can, but people will not be able to picture it correctly until you give them something truly visual.
Right. And you did. You had the cast of characters and the ship that. My cousin was with me, and he talked to your brother quite a bit about the cast and how amazing that the artwork was.
Yeah, I learned from the best, and I was advised by the best as far as the marketing goes.
So, what are the rest of your plans for this year? Are you going to any more conventions?
There's Sabo Con, which my brother is pushing for here in the Valley. It's like a lesser fan fusion.
Uh huh.
Sorry to anyone who's working at Sabo Con. I'm sure. I'm just saying you're on a smaller physical scale, not that the convention is lesser than Fan Fusion. And I've gotten invites to New York Comic Con, Houston Comic Con, and elsewhere,
Nice.
but we'll see. I mean, I can only travel around so much, and obviously there are budgetary things to consider. But I'm probably going to spend the rest of the year writing books 7 and maybe start on book 8, and then in between I'm going to be promoting like I did at Fan Fusion.
Nice. So, is there any advice that you'd like to give any new authors? I think that card that you mentioned earlier is a great one that I think anybody could benefit with. Is there any other advice that you'd like to share?
Yes, and this is both to authors that have already put books out and authors that are starting or think about starting. This is a full-time job. This is there. Everyone out there I know believes they can just, if they have all the time in the world and a computer, they can just sit down and write a book. It's not that simple. This is a full-time job. You have to treat it as a full-time job. even if you have something on the side to keep the lights on at home and your internet access. So, my advice is to go at it, whether you're in full, whether you're making your own science fiction universe or you're writing a great mystery. You plan out everything. Even if you don't have much to start out with, you plan out as much as you can at the start. And then once you begin the story, eventually the rest of it will fall into place. But the fact is, you have something to start on first.
That's great advice. Um, I like to liken it to driving a car. Like if you get in a car right now and you don't have it turned on, it's pretty tough to steer it. Like you can't turn the steering wheel, but if you get it
Yeah.
moving just a little bit, you can get it steering. You can move the wheels and get it down the road a little bit.
Yeah, and that's a very apt analogy because when in the daytime, my job is essentially to run around in my car doing odd jobs. And I have to plan for traffic patterns, the condition of the road, whether there's work being done on it or not, and even things as far as the local climate. Because, I mean, here in Arizona, it was 107 degrees out today. So I could not be out for too long without risking heat stroke.
Right.
So I had to get my job done as quickly but as efficiently as possible and make sure all parties were satisfied. And that's what you basically have to do as a writer.
Daniel, I appreciate you getting on with me. Go ahead and tell everybody how. We already mentioned your website, www.danielcrux, crux with the x.com. Is there any social media that they can follow you?
Yes, I'm on Facebook. I mean, there are different Daniel Cruxes on Facebook, but I'm the only one with the Golden Jolly Roger as my icon. I also I'm also on fanfiction.net. I mean, that's another piece of advice I'd give. You have to keep writing, even if you can't stick with one story. You just keep writing no matter what. And I started out as a fan fiction writer, so when I'm not working on Black Sun or one of my original products, that's what I'm working on. And I'm on fanfiction.net as under the screen name Wing Zero Alpha, exactly as it sounds, 3 words. So if you
Nice.
want to, so if you want to read stories that I've written that I can't make any money on whatsoever, that's where you can go.
People can get a little taste of how you write and read some stories. Wing Zero Alpha.
Yep. And I'm also on DeviantArt. That's where the presently the Black Sun artwork is until I get a proper wiki going. It also has some information to the characters, the ships, technology, and even things that like the individual factions. The different nation states in the galaxy.
Uh huh.
I mentioned clans earlier. There's also the what Earth is right now and different alien nations. So you can find the information on them on DeviantArt, and I think that's pretty much it for right now.
Perfect. Well, Daniel, I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to get on with me. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Troy Podcast. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.